Baseball's more than just a playing field. It's an entire experience. And an older ballpark like Tiger Stadium is even more than that. It's a living, breathing museum of baseball history. In here, the ghosts of baseball's past mingle with the stars of today, continuing that century-old tradition that we wait so impatiently for each spring and then watch reluctantly as it passes every October.
As baseball's popularity soared at the turn of the century, team owners saw a demand for newer and bigger arenas to house America's pastime. Starting in 1909, an incredible era of ballpark construction had begun in cities like Philadelphia, St. Louis, Brooklyn, and New York. When it was over in 1923, 15 new steel and concrete ballparks were built, and the game itself took on a whole new flavor. Each of these ballparks played a vital role in shaping the character of America's greatest cities, and no two of them were alike. Their odd shapes and unique characteristics resulted from the confining street patterns in the cities where they were built. But today, only 4 of these classic ballparks remain. Towering Tiger Stadium in Detroit, Boston's Fenway Park, the smallest and quirkiest in the majors, and Chicago's 2 classics, Wrigley Field on the north side and Comiskey Park, baseball's oldest, on the south side. These 4 landmark ballparks are all on the endangered species list. They're from a simpler time when baseball was more sport than business and when ballparks were built for baseball only. Attending a game at one of the classic ballparks is an experience we hand down generation to generation. They are baseball's heirlooms.
Tiger Stadium and the other ballparks that we see like it, I think, have character, and not like the cookie cutters at some of the ballparks that you see. You don't know whether you're in Atlanta or Pittsburgh or Cincinnati or Des Moines or wherever. They're all designed alike. And in the older ballparks like Tiger Stadium, the fans are down close. They can see the guys sweat and hear them cuss, and they're right on top of them, and they feel like they're in the play, and it's a more intimate feeling that they have with the players in the game. And I think it's great that the old parks can still stand up.
For over 80 years, these great old walls have soaked up the cheering and the booing of fans, the heated arguments between the umpires and the managers, no-hitters, pennant-clinching victories, game-winning home runs. Oh, I'll tell you, if these walls could talk, what a story they'd tell.
The Detroit Tigers are one of the charter franchises in the newly formed American League back in 1901. They played their games in a rickety wooden affair known as Bennett Park, the same spot where Tiger Stadium sits today. But the future of baseball in Detroit was hardly secure until Ty Cobb joined the team in 1905. It was Cobb's base-stealing genius and extraordinary batting skill that drew huge crowds and firmly established baseball as a major league sport in Detroit. As the Tigers' popularity grew, owners Frank Navin and William Yawkey decided in 1911 to build a first-class ballpark for Detroit. They dismantled Bennett Park and built a steel and concrete ballpark, renaming it Navin Field. The spacious ballpark was a perfect showcase for Cobb's talents, in more ways than one. Groundskeepers kept the area in front of home plate well soaked to slow down Cobb's trademark bunts and make the fielders slip as they tried to grab them.
He'd come out with the watering cans and water, and then he'd come on, Mr. Cobb would come out and test it. And see if it was all right, and then he'd say, well, that's all right, that's enough for now. And then he'd come back a couple hours later, and Mr. Cobb, he'd test it and say, put a little more water on it. So they put more water on it. The catcher for the other team would be falling in the mud, and the other players would be coming around, and Mr. Cobb could slide in.
The quagmire soon became known as Cobb's Lake, and it's an early example of how the playing field itself could influence the outcome of a game.
Cobb was a real demon on the ball field, no question about that, and he would go in with spikes high, and he felt like the base paths belonged to him. If anybody got in the way, it was just too bad. There was a little trick that he had when he got at first base. He would kick the bag another 2 inches over towards second base. And people thought for a long time that that was just a superstition that he had. But he was trying to gain another inch or two when he was trying to steal second base. That was Ty Cobb. He was always thinking.
With the invention and mass production of the automobile, Detroit grew at an incredible rate, and so did the ballpark. In 1924, owner Frank Navin had the stands double-decked from first to third base and installed a press box on the roof. Now, this gamble paid off as the Tigers drew over 1 million fans for the first time that year. Going to a ball game at Navin Field was a real event.
The fans in the early days were completely dressed. They had coats and ties. The men had derbies. And you look at the old pictures, you very seldom see any ladies at the ball game.
Well, they had good crowds on weekend, not like they do now, but when the fences were low, they used to sit over on the roof and watch the ball game from some of the houses back there. But they're all dressed fancy. Nowadays, everybody comes in their blue jeans and whatever. But I remember in the old days, people used to be dressed up quite fancy.
In 1935, the Tigers won their first world championship, beating the Chicago Cubs 4-2. But the joy turned to sorrow 2 weeks later when owner Navin, an avid horseman, died after falling off a horse. Walter Spike Briggs assumed control of the team and quickly went to work expanding the ballpark. With the field completely double-decked in 1938, it was renamed Briggs Stadium and ushered in a whole new era of baseball in Detroit.
He bought the team because he loved baseball. He couldn't get a ticket to their game. He really loved the game itself and wanted to be a part of that game. And he also was a hard-nosed negotiator. There were stories of him holding out when players wanted larger contracts, and no, you didn't do well last year, so you're going to get actually lowering contracts. So I wouldn't say that in all cases he was a favored owner, but he respected the game.
In 1941, Briggs Stadium hosted its very first All-Star game. With the American League down 3-2 in the bottom of the ninth, a capacity crowd watched anxiously as Boston left fielder Ted Williams stepped to the plate.
Sprinter like a big bass fisherman. He goes out and he gets a 10-pounder. And that is a big thrill. He got a 10-pound bass. But you know, after you get your third and fourth and fifth and sixth, that same thrill at the same time wouldn't mean as much. That hit that I got in the All-Star game was my first regular played all the way through All-Star game. And then we won it with a home run that I hit in the ninth inning. Really, I think that's the biggest thrill I ever get in baseball.
The Tiger teams in the 1940s were among the greatest in their history. They won the pennant in 1940 and took the World Series in 1945. The team included such stalwarts as pitchers Hal Newhouser and legendary slugger Hank Greenberg.
Barehanded. Hit out of one era right into another. A lot of home runs have been hit up here into the right field overhang at Tiger Stadium. It's probably the most famous home run porch in baseball. From home plate to right here, it's 310 feet.
The upper deck, when it was built, actually extends over the lower grandstand on the one side and over the street than the other side. So what you have is a very short home run porch to the upper deck in right field, and a building that actually overhangs the street behind it. And again, this was a consequence of the attempt to maximize seating capacity on a finite site. This is a very novel solution and is part of what gives Tiger Stadium its unique characteristics.
The late 40s and early 50s saw the emergence of two new superstars at Tiger Stadium, third baseman George Kell and right fielder Al Kaline.
This is important, that the people be a part of the game. I like for the people to be right on top. I like to hear the people. And at Tiger Stadium, at third base, I could hear everything that was said over there. One day, Hal Newhouser was pitching, one of the great pitchers here, and he's being rocked real good by the Boston club. And he came over to back up third base, and some fan was getting on him real good, and and I said, hey, hang in there, Hal, don't worry about that guy. And I heard the guy say, you're not doing too good yourself, Kel. So you could hear everything. I like that.
I kid everybody. I said they built Yankee Stadium for Babe Ruth to make a short right field fence, but they tore down the stadium for Al Kaline because I was getting hurt all the time. It had a very low wall right next to the foul line in right field. They were about knee high, and I'm running after a fly ball looking up, and all of a sudden I hit the wall and tumble into the stands. And they said, oh, gee, this kid won the batting title in 1955. We don't want to lose him. So they ended up taking those seats out so that I wouldn't hurt myself. And that's why they called it K-Line's Corner, because they altered the stadium to round the stands out instead of having them come straight down the foul line.
In 1960, the club changed hands again, this time to broadcasting magnate John Fetzer. Fetzer renamed the ballpark Tiger Stadium in 1961, and by the mid-60s, the Tigers were back in contention again.
68 was a great season in Detroit because the season before the Tigers had come very close. They'd lost the pennant on the final day. We'd had the riots in Detroit that had really broken the town in two. And in 68, the town came back together rooting for the Tigers. They had a common interest, and I think it really cemented all the factions that had broken out during the riot, put them back together and made Detroit a city of harmony and peace once again.
Against the St. Louis Cardinals, we were the decisive underdogs because they had been world champions before. They had all veteran players, and of course they had the great Bob Gibson. And we weren't given a great big chance of winning, but the enthusiasm of the Tiger fans, I think I remember that most, the way they came to the ballpark and trying to encourage their hometown heroes, even knowing that we didn't have much of a chance to win.
You name me any other city in America that's been through the trials and the tribulations, the unemployment problems that this city has, because this is the nature of this city. It's an industrial town, automotive town. They have layoffs, and they live and they die with automobiles. And they've had so many bad years in the last 20 with automobiles and in employment. But yet they keep flocking to Tiger Stadium, and we say, well, they won't draw as well next year. We can't. We have 20% unemployment in this city, and at times 25. But they still come to Tiger Stadium. It is, without a doubt, one of the great sports cities of America.
There are seats right behind home plate that hang over the on-deck batter's box. That's the closest seat in baseball. You can literally sit there, look over the catcher's shoulder. You could take your gum out of your mouth and just flick it and hit the on-deck hitter on the head. You're practically directly over the batter's box so that you can see the player move, the hitter moving his feet in the batter's box. So you can see him changing his stance from pitch to pitch. Wonderful sense of changing speeds from the good seats in Tiger Stadium. When you see Jack Morris throw a fastball followed by a split-finger fastball going 20 miles an hour slower, you can understand that you cannot hit a good changeup. Your neurons won't allow you to. When you're timed to that faster pitch, you physically cannot change your timing. And it's the only park where I've ever felt, including all press boxes, where you're so close and so intimate that you can sense what changing speeds means.
The other day I was sitting in that ballpark, and I was sitting next to some of the young Toronto Blue Jays players, and you got down in what is really an authentic dugout, as they have in Fenway Park also, and in Wrigley Field. No more of this flat stuff where you're just on flat ground like in so many multi-purpose artificial stadiums. And one of the young kids said, you know, I'm sitting in a spot right here, and with all these dents and everything, and this same old padding, you think Cobb sat right in the same spot? So even a kid like that who has some historical perspective thought about that old ballpark and a real dugout, dug out of the ground, and thought about some of the ghosts that are still roaming that stadium.
There's a sense of some of the old ghosts that played here. A lot of the older ball players, you could see where they hit balls and see what they had done in their careers in these certain parks. And there's a lot of charm and individuality in some of these ballparks, whereas in some of the National League parks, they're all pretty much the same. And there's no little idiosyncrasies in the alleys or little things in the walls that you have to be careful of. There's lots of things in these ballparks as an outfielder you really have to look out for.
Being a player, there's nothing like playing in the old ballparks. The backgrounds were all great. And there's some history to it. The fields are all different. Now you see all the new ballparks, they're all 330 down the line, all 400 center field. They're all made the same, so you play one ballpark, you play them all. Modern is great, but we still need a touch of the old times.
came here as a visitor, I didn't like playing here very well, only because it was a big ballpark. It always seemed to be cold and damp with a lake out here. It's nice in the daytime when the Cubs play, but at night the wind turns around and comes off the lake and makes it pretty uncomfortable most of the time. But it is one of the granddaddies, or the granddaddy of Major League Baseball parks. And come here, there's a lot of history and a lot of baseball that represents itself when you walk through the doors. So it's nice to play here.
This is Bridgeport. It's a brick bungalowed Irish, German, and Hispanic working-class neighborhood from which Comiskey Park draws its heart and soul. White Sox fans display a fierce loyalty, and they hand this legacy down from generation to generation, much like a son inherits a trade from his father.
The very first generation of White Sox fans witnessed the construction of Comiskey Park back in 1910. Charles Comiskey, a charter owner in the fledgling American League, wanted no less than a baseball palace of the world, as his park was soon nicknamed. He commissioned architect Zachary Taylor Davis, who would later design Wrigley Field, to start design work on the ballpark in 1902.
Comiskey Park has always been regarded as a pitcher's park, and Charles Comiskey always had very firm ideas that it should be symmetrical, kind of classical order to it. And of course, the story is that he was influenced by one of his pitchers, Ed Walsh, to make it a pitcher's park.
Cocky Walsh, they called him, and some writers said that he was the only man who can strut while he's sitting down. He was a consultant. They had consultants in those days, and he was the star pitcher not only of the White Sox, but all of baseball. This man won 40 games one season, which is just beyond comprehension today. But he met with the architect, and he helped this guy design a pitcher's park.
The original Charles Comiskey was a pioneer. He had a lot of nicknames. They called him the Old Roman, or a lot of reasons why, and then, of course, a lot of his close friends called him Commie. He was a man ahead of his time. You know, he had that great foresight that this game, the great game of baseball, was going to be a very American game, and he wanted to be part of it.
Comiskey was determined that his White Sox would be the premier team of the day, and by 1917, he got his wish. That year, the Sox were world champions. They were loaded with such greats as Eddie Seacott, Ray Schalk, and shoeless Joe Jackson. In 1919, they took the American League pennant again, but when they entered the World Series, the history of the team and the sport of baseball took a dramatic downturn.
Memory was my dad and his pals in the kitchen during Prohibition with their near beer and homebrew, really, and holding it up to the light. They always did that. They said, "Oh, Joe," they're telling my dad, that looks like the real thing, so pure. And then they'd get talking about this great baseball team. And I thought that was my heritage, that this great team that had shoeless Joe Jackson and Buck Weaver and, as they call them, Cy Cotty and Gandil and Risberg and all these guys who had, I learned much later, had conspired to dump the 1919 World Series. And these guys were such great players that when they weren't trying, it took them 8 games to lose the World Series.
Comiskey was a notorious cheapskate. His White Sox were grossly underpaid despite their enormous talent. And in that fateful World Series of 1919, 8 White Sox players, later known as the Black Sox, conspired to throw the series to Cincinnati. The scandal changed the fortunes of the White Sox forever.
So, really, I thought that was my heritage, and then as I grew older and the White Sox descended into 7th or 8th place and would sometimes lose 100 games a year, I realized that that was what I was going to have.
But Comiskey Park also has an entirely different history for a different community. The black baseball leagues were coming into their own, and Comiskey Park played host to many of the East-West All-Star games, including the very first one in 1933.
The East-West game was a natural because the American Giants, Chicago's team in the Negro National League, played right up the street at 39th Street in the ballpark that had been the original White Sox Park. So it was an obvious thing with the black population of Chicago, and Chicago being really the mecca of Negro baseball, because the man who was the commissioner of the league lived here, just as the commissioner of white baseball lived here. This was the capital of everything in baseball in that day.
Oh, we had ball players. Listen, we had guys like that guy Willie Wells and knew that never used with one hand and never dropped the ball. Oh, we had some men play first base like Goose Tatum, Buck O'Neill, and there's another boy could have made it, George Giles, or you should see him. Cool Papa Bell. Boy, we had so many good ball players. Listen, we'd be glad when we get a chance to play some white team, because when you play them other colored teams, it's like rock against rock.
There were no black players in Major League Baseball. And my grandfather said that he felt that the blacks should have a showcase. They had the Negro Leagues in those days. So the first East-West All-Star black game was played at Comiskey Park. Well, it became a tradition. Even in my time, I mean, 55,000 people.
It's a great feeling to be playing for a big crowd, because an empty stand, you know you ain't gonna get nothing. But it's a great feeling when you see that stand full. It gives you inspiration to go. It gives you that willpower to do something. And still, if you had a couple of nice-looking girls waiting for you, too, that made it much better.
The 1930s and 40s were lean years at Comiskey Park, and the area around the ballpark was declining as well. Industry was leaving, and the nearby stockyards had closed down. But in the booming 1950s, the South Side came alive again with the advent of the Go-Go White Sox, a team built of outstanding speed, pitching, and defense.
The White Sox in 1959 were a great ball club. Al Lopez will always be regarded as one of the outstanding managers ever, and he ran that ball club. Now, this was, of course, after the White Sox had started to turn around from the unfortunate days of the 40s. Now along come the early 50s, and Frank Lane as general manager and Paul Richards as field manager turned that ball club around, and now you have the Go-Go Sox. Great, just great guys. Now, that ball club won a pennant and deserved to win the pennant.
Fire Commissioner Quinn, he sounded the sirens when the Sox beat the Indians and clinched the pennant, and so people thought the Russians were coming. And they hit on the bed. Some had heart attacks because the sirens were blowing. The Sox had won the first pennant since 1919 when they blew the World Series. So all that comes to mind when you're at a ballpark, an old-time ballpark, and not one of these modern stadia.
Dimensions of this ballpark have changed over the years. The fence in center field that you see now makes it about a 410. Were not there originally in 49 when I came, and before that it was about 440-foot shot to center field, and great for a pitcher. Of course, after playing here a few years, you really got to love the ballpark, the fans, and you were proud of where you played.
The late 50s also marked the beginning of the Bill Veeck era. A former Cub employee, Veeck bought the team from the Comiskey family before the start of the 59 season.
Bill Veeck just electrified this town both times he came here. He electrified any room that he was in.
Attending a game at Comiskey Park is kind of like seeing a three-ring circus. If the game on the field isn't enough to hold your interest, they've got this 24-foot video screen looming overhead, showing an endless series of instant replays. Or the exploding scoreboard out in center field. And if that's not enough, well, then they've got fireworks displays at night games throughout the season.
Bill always loved fireworks. You remember that play where of Soroyans where they're in the bar, and all through the play, the man is shooting the pinball machine, and he finally wins. And Bill always loved that play. And this was the little man against the odds, the whole thing. But he loved the excitement of that, and that's where the idea for the exploding scoreboard came to, that all of a sudden you hit a home run and you won the jackpot.
Veeck was something else. He was bred baseball, everything from selling peanuts to general manager. And So he had the feel, and he best describes the game as something, the best thing for your money's worth. You take your time, there's no rush. The only game isn't fighting the clock. And it's a game you savor. It's a phrase you use, savor it. You know, the easy answer, that's what it's about. Instead, it's becoming something else. And so Veeck represented that last of the species.
Bill Veeck was passionate about his ball club in the city of Chicago. Though poor health forced him to sell the team in 1961, he repurchased the White Sox in 1975 when he discovered the team was set to move from Chicago. But the financial makeup of Major League Baseball was too much for the enterprising Veeck to bear, and finally, in 1980, he was forced to sell the team. He died 6 years later at the age of 71.
He had a feeling that we were all in this together. The fans really, the club belonged to them. He was the custodian, and we should all have fun together doing it.
He was considered a maverick, a renegade, a bad influence by many of the owners. But when you really take a look back at what Bill Veeck did for the game of baseball, baseball owes him a great debt.
Today, baseball has become big business, run as much by lawyers, accountants, and bankers as it is by managers on the field. There's little or no room for a passionate baseball fan like Bill Veeck, and sadly, not much time left for a giant heirloom like Comiskey Park either. By 1991, the former baseball palace of the world will be reduced to a parking lot, serving the patrons of the new stadium, which is under construction, right across the street.
Richie Daley said they could drop a bomb at 35th and Bill Veeck Drive and that park wouldn't fall down. And that's the truth. This place is built like a fort. And it's so Chicago. In Europe, they preserve places like this. They preserve their magnificent old buildings. But here we tear down everything. If we had a civilized society, these people would be sent to prison.
It'll be one more McDonald's, one more Golden Arch, one more Howard Johnson, one more Marriott. I'm speaking metaphorically. What I mean is it'll be that kind of park. It'll be like the other domed stadiums. And so what goes is another piece of individuality.
Well, Comiskey Park is an old ballpark, and I hate the thought that they're going to build something new there, because I don't think they'll ever discover the charisma that is Comiskey Park. It's a ballpark like Wrigley Field, steeped in tradition. You know, you can't buy that every time you turn around.
Year after year, more than 1.5 million Cub fans make the faithful pilgrimage by elevated railway, by the L, to Wrigley Field, here on the north side of Chicago. They step off the Addison Street station and the ballpark's it's right there. It's only a block away.
Wrigley Field is the oldest ballpark in the National League and the fourth oldest in the majors. But the Northside Ballpark wasn't always called Wrigley Field and didn't always house the Cubs either. In 1914, Chicago restaurant chain owner Charles Wiegman co-founded the ill-fated Federal League, an upstart competitor to the major leagues. That year, he hired architect Zachary Taylor Davis to build a new ballpark for his own Federal League entry, the Chicago Whales. The newly christened Wiegman Field opened on April 23, 1914, and was one of the finest in the country, with a single-deck seating capacity of 14,000. The Chicago Whales played there only 2 years before the Renegade League folded. Wiegman got the National League team, the Cubs, as part of his settlement and moved them into his own ballpark where they still play. The park became known as Cubs Park in 1920 after chewing gum magnate William Wrigley Jr. purchased the team from Wiegman. In 1926, Wrigley added a new upper deck to enlarge the seating capacity and renamed the ballpark Wrigley Field. After the elder Wrigley died in 1932, his son Philip K. Wrigley assumed ownership.
Phil Wrigley was particularly visionary when he took over the ball club in the early 30s from his father. After that, the Cubs began to go real well. If you realize they had pennants in 29, 32, 35, 38, 45. And this was all during Phil Wrigley's time. He was a man who was gung-ho for let's go with radio, and later on, let's go with television.
The 1930s were rollicking times at Wrigley Field despite the Depression. The 32 World Series against the Yankees saw Babe Ruth's famous called shot home run in game number 3. In 1935, Cubs employee Bill Veck planted the fabled ivy on the outfield walls, giving the ballpark the same kind of ambiance as its surrounding Lakeview neighborhood.
Some of the apartment buildings here on Sheffield Avenue, right behind center and right field, even have their own rooftop grandstands, kind of like a poor man's skybox, where lucky tenants and owners can catch a game on the privacy of their own home.
To sit in Wrigley Field and look across the street during the game and see the fans on the rooftops, or to go outside the ballpark after a game and see a rock band there playing a kind of impromptu concert. All of this kind of street life adds to the vitality of the city itself, but it also makes the ballpark a kind of more magical place.
I do know this, that it's a wonderful little neighborhood. You got restaurants, you got bars, which I'm interested in, and it's a lovely place when you leave the ballpark to have something to do, somebody to talk to. I love that.
It was a park that was built in a very unique area there. It's close to a community. It's like it's like an apartment building or home in the community, and you have to really be a part of that. Unlike other parks, where the park is usually off the downtown area. I mean, you zip right in to Riverfront Stadium, watch the game, you zip right back on the expressways, and you back to Kentucky, Indiana, and all the different cities. But Wrigley Field, when you're in there, it's like visiting the family of all the people that live around there. And as a player, you feel a part of the family of the people in that community.
In 1937, the ballpark was renovated again. New outfield stands were built and a new scoreboard was constructed. With its intimate dimensions and lush green ivy, Wrigley Field soon became known, as it is today, as the Friendly Confines.
Wrigley Field, being a small ballpark, when you went up to the plate, you know, when sitting on the on-deck circle, the fan used to be about 4 or 5 feet from you. And if you're not careful, every time you go to the plate, you try to swing and hit the ball out the ballpark, because everyone wants to see the home run. And you hear a lot of people behind you say, Billy, he's going to be on base, try to hit the ball out the ballpark. So everything was close here.
It's a close park. You have eye contact with people. They watch you very closely. You cannot hide anything. It's like being under a microscope. You can be playing second base at Wrigley Field, and your kid will walk by, or your wife will come by, or some beautiful girl walk by, and your concentration just kind of drifts away from you. And once you lose it, it's hard to get it back.
I imagined all major league parks almost like football stadiums, you know what I mean, in the sense that fans were way away from you. And then walking in there and saying, holy cow, you just walk down and they can shake your hand, you know. The other interesting part was when I retired, I went to a ball game and sat in the first row, and I never realized how close home plate was to that box seat. So they must have heard a lot of things I said to the umpire that I didn't realize.
Something else strikes me about Wrigley Field. It's the big green scoreboard towering above the center field bleachers. This scoreboard is a throwback to a simpler time, before the days of instant replays and exploding fireworks. See, up here, the scores of all the games are posted by hand.
The Cubs in the 1950s and early 60s became lovable losers to their loyal fans at Wrigley Field. They never rose above 5th place in 2 decades of play. But in 1969, the club was suddenly in a pennant race, leading the New York Mets by 9 games going into September. The Cubs managed to lose the pennant by 8 games to the Mets, but it was in that incredible season that the fabled bleacher bums were born.
They were fun. Phil Wrigley, as a matter of fact, was very taken by them. If you may recall, he even filled up a plane or two and sent them down as his guest to Atlanta for a weekend series one time there. And they were good kids. And of course, you had the right field bleacher bums too. They were the rival organization.
I think it started with about 12 or 13 of them. And they all have their original cards now, although you see maybe 25 or 30 people with bleacher bum cards. But they would sit out there and they would really enjoy the game. Seemed like they would be here 2 hours before the game time.
They come to the park and they would not razz the opposing left fielders. They would always support them and cheer for them too, as well as us. So they were a big part of the Cubs' success in 1969.
The first thing a Cub fan looks for when he comes to the ballpark are the flags above the center field scoreboard. Not only do they line up in order of the National League standings, but they also indicate the wind direction. More than any other factor, stiff breezes blowing off Lake Michigan just blocks away can make or break a game at Wrigley Field. An outbound wind together with the park's tight power alleys conspire to make this a home run hitter's paradise.
The wind didn't affect me that much. I know I've seen several players come in and it had some effect on the players. Not only the players who are playing every day, the pitchers. There were several pitchers came in Wrigley Field and saw that flag blowing out like this and they didn't want to pitch. Something was wrong with them. Got it real quick. They got sick.
You know, I keep hearing about other players, well, if they were in Wrigley Field, they'd hit 60 home runs. Well, the wind blows out, but the wind also blows in. There's times that you can't get a cannon out of that ballpark.
Until 1988, one of Wrigley Field's most distinguishing features was its lack of lights. Philip Wrigley always had maintained that baseball was meant to be played in the sunshine. Lights were almost installed, however, in the fall of 1941.
He had the light material purchased, and a lot of it was underneath the stands in left field or out near Waveland Avenue or someplace. Then all of a sudden came a little thing called Pearl Harbor, and that took care of that. And rather than have that critical material be used for something as comparatively unimportant as baseball, he had his man Jim Gallagher on the phone offering this to the Army engineers, the Navy Seabees, or whoever could really use it.
In 1981, the Wrigley family sold the team and the ballpark to Chicago's Tribune Company, paving the way for nighttime baseball at Wrigley Field. In 1984, when the Cubs won the National League East Division, pressure from Major League Baseball and the television networks brought the lights issue out of the dark. Despite neighborhood opposition to lights, a referendum cleared the city council, and in the summer of '88, light towers were erected. Then, on August 8th, history was made.
She won the tickets last night in a raffle.
Out of 50 million fans, when I was notified that I'm the guy who could turn on the lights, I got tongue-tied, I was amazed, and believe me, I was highly honored.
When they first turned on those lights out there, I had mixed emotion because I didn't want to see the lights go on and just kill Wrigley Field. But it was good. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the night games, and a lot of people who came to that first baseball game enjoyed the night game.
We definitely made history last year playing the first night game, and you know, I think that it's going to be good. It just gives another time where a fan can come out and watch a ball game.
They added lights, which I think in itself is going to help the ball club, but I like the stadium just the way it is. It's not one of the more huge stadiums that you find in baseball. It's a ballpark. It's a place where you can come, relax, have fun. You don't have to dress up. You find people that sunbathe out in the right field, left field stands. They get involved in the game. It's what baseball is all about. You play it in the daytime and you just enjoy it and have fun.
Playing in the outfield, it kind of helped me relax And I would talk to fans in the stand. I would kid with fans in the stand while the pitcher's taking time on the mound. So the closeness of the entire ballpark just gave me a feeling of homely feeling playing here in Wrigley Field.
A lot of people I've met brought their children, their grandchildren to the park, and they've grown up, and I've had an opportunity to see them, and it's really a blessing to have played there. And playing for the Cubs or playing for any park that has tradition, you get that continuous family tie, continuous love for you as a person and for the team in which you represented. And mine was the Cubs, and it's just very fulfilling.
If you try and explain to a fan what it means to see a ball game in Detroit, in Fenway Park, in Boston here, in Wrigley Field, Comiskey Park, you can't explain it. There's a special excitement because of all the fond memories.
First time I came to Boston, I thought I was in the middle of a jigsaw puzzle with pieces missing. The streets start and stop. They're narrow and confusing. Some of them don't go anywhere. But then when I came out to Fenway Park, I realized just why the ballpark was so quirky. See, Fenway has been fit into this haphazard pattern of streets. It's just been sort of squeezed into this industrial area. And it's just like the city that surrounds it.
Boston at the turn of the century was a bustling little seaport city with an increasingly popular baseball team, the Red Sox. By 1911, the team's popularity was so great that a new ballpark had to be built to accommodate its growing legion of fans. Fenway Park was built in a marshy area of Boston called the Fens, near Kenmore Square, and opened its gates for the first time on April 20th, 1912. It was a quirky little ballpark right from the start, filled with idiosyncrasies like Duffy's Cliff, a 10-foot high slope that ran along the left field wall.
Duffy's Cliff was a little terrace that extended from the left field foul line back to center field, and it was named for Duffy Lewis, who patrolled it out there in left field when he played for the Boston Red Sox. And there was an old story about Smead Jolly that he would go up the cliff and come down and miss the ball as he came down. And he said, well, they taught me how to go up, but nobody taught me how to come back down.
The Red Sox were world champions in 1915, 16, and 1918. The team at that time was owned by Harry Frazee, a Broadway theater producer who had more flops than hits. He was forced to sell many of his star players to remain solvent.
In 1919, Ruth had the big year, hit 29 home runs. So his friend was Jake Rupert, who owned the Yankees. And Rupert was trying to build up the New York Ball Club. We owned the town, we owned baseball for about 5 years, and Rupert was trying to make something with the Yankees. So Rupert offered him $140,000 or something to that effect, and a mortgage on the Fenway Park if he'd send Ruth. And he sent him to him. And we lost Babe Ruth in 1919.
The sale of Ruth marked the end of the Red Sox decade-long dominance, but the beginning of the Yankees dynasty. In the dark years of the Great Depression, the club was sold to lumber magnate Thomas A. Yawkey. Immediately in 1933, Yawkey began renovating a neglected Fenway Park, expanding the outfield bleachers and shoring up the wooden seats with a concrete base. Yawkey also replaced the great wooden wall in left field with a menacing metal barrier, and in 1936 installed a 23-foot screen on top of the monstrous wall to protect shop windows on Lansdowne Street.
At one time, it was just a wall, and you'd hear the balls, see balls go over the fence and hear glass breaking. Bill Huddleston had a bar across the street, and Huddleston used to sit in the press box, and he'd hear the glass shattering. That's his bar, see? And someone said, there goes another window, Bill, and oh, he'd rush out of the place and change his window. So, as I said, it was a fun place. You went away laughing. You came in mad at the team, but you went away laughing with the things that happened.
This is the Green Monster in Fenway Park, the most celebrated outfield fence in baseball. No other stadium feature in the major leagues affects a game quite like this 37-foot, 2-inch high wall. It's only 315 feet down a left field foul line, so if you're hanging on to a 3-run lead going into the bottom of the 9th inning, that really doesn't mean very much when you got the monster breathing down your neck. As many Red Sox pitchers will tell you, the wall giveth and the wall taketh away.
Fred Lynn and I were standing on the on-deck circle. I said, Freddie, I'm going to hit one off the wall, drive me in. And why I said that or why I felt that, I had no idea. And he says, well, that sounds good to me. And then 2 pitches later, I hit the ball off the foul pole or above the wall. If that had been in any of the newer ballparks, the foul line would have been further away and the ball might have hooked foul. But it being the ballpark that it is, it's created quite a few very, very special moments in the history of baseball.
But the wall taketh away, too. Most Red Sox fans recall with agony one home run in particular. This one off the bat of Yankee shortstop Bucky Dent.
After the final game of the 1978 season, when the Yankees won the American League East by beating the Red Sox, there was a dead silence over the field. No one wanted to go home. It had been such a wonderful pennant race. Everyone stood still, a standing, silent ovation for what had gone on. And the public address announcer played calliope music, like children going to a fair, the carousel where the hobby horses go around. It was eerie. Nobody moved, nobody said a thing. They listened to this marvelous calliope music.
All across the country, you hear people saying, boy, they'd love to see a game at Fenway Park, and I think the biggest reason is the outfield walls. There's so many different dimensions. It's not like most ballparks with the round type wall. It's you know, we have the big 37-foot wall out there in left field. Then in center field we have what everybody refers to as the triangle, where it goes out to 420 feet, and then the way the bullpens and the right field wall curve around. It's an exciting ballpark to watch a game in. It's an exciting ballpark to play a game in.
Small enough, yet big enough. Everyone has fun, and the wall is green. Right.
Well, let me put it to you this way. I have a daughter that's home right now, and when she finds out that I was here to a Yankee-Red Sox game, she's going to want to kill me because she's not here.
My best memory here was watching Mel Parnell pitch. He was one of our best left-handed pitchers that we had as a child. My dad used to take us on family night. Sat in the grandstand behind third base.
The ivy and the fern, and it's gracious. That's what it is. It's a gracious park.
Used to wave at Ted Williams when he wouldn't wave back, and my kids all thought he did. When he tipped his hat or he didn't tip it, I'd say, see, he saw us. He didn't see us.
Fenway's fans are probably the most knowledgeable and have the most intimate relationship with the people who write about the teams. I remember walking through Fenway Park once with a fellow named Bob Ryan, a wonderful sports writer, very tart and funny, real wit, but also very critical of things. Walking through Fenway Park with him one day, and a man who might have weighed 300 pounds stood up about 3 rows back as we were walking past and said, "Bob Ryan." And Ryan said to me, "Keep walking." And he said, "Bobby Ryan, you hear me?" And Ryan turned around, and the guy stood up and pointed at me. He says, "Nice column today, Ryan." That could only happen in Boston.
This red seat in the 37th row of the right field bleachers is where Ted Williams, one of the greatest left-handed batters of all time, hit his longest Fenway Park home run.
There was an old guy sitting there in one of those old straw skimmers. You remember the ribbons? And he's sound asleep. And the ball comes down and hits him on the straw hat, breaks his hat, and wakes him up. It's a true story.
Williams hit so many of them out here that the fans began calling it Williamsburg, and another piece of Fenway folklore was born.
All of these cities that have them old ballparks are the greatest baseball towns in the country. Now, I know Cincinnati had their old little Crosby Field, and it developed fans because I know why it developed fans. I know why it developed fans because the hitters came to the front in those parks a little more. The hitters.
Williams had a remarkable career spanning parts of 4 decades. In 1960, he finally called it quits, but on his very last at-bat, he gave the fans at Fenway Park one last moment to savor.
Every time I got up there, I tried to hit a ball hard. I didn't even think of a home run my last time at bat. I was trying to hit a home run like I always did. If I had the count or I had a pitcher I thought I could do it against, and I'd hit 2 balls good that day. And they just were short, and I hit them good. I thought they should be gone. But it was one of those little dampish days, and it was no wind really, not foggy and dead. And I hit 2 balls 400 feet out there, and hell, they were outs. And the last time up, I I hit one probably, apparently just a little bit better, and it got in there. Home run.
After a decade of second-rate finishes by the Red Sox in the late 50s and early 60s, interest in the team had dwindled. But owner Tom Yawkey was slowly building a winner with players like Rico Petrocelli, Tony Conigliaro, and Carl Yastrzemski. Finally, in 1967, the fans had a reason to return to Fenway Park.
67 changed the entire Red Sox organization, changed the attitude of the fans in New England. Now they thought as Red Sox as winners and not losers, and that's what brought baseball back in New England.
That period from July right down to the first day of October when that season ended was an incredible time, because every single day that you went to the ballpark, you knew that everybody in New England was listening or watching or at the ballpark, and it was just an experience that I'll never, ever forget.
Every player on that team wanted to win that pennant for Mr. Yawkey that year, and somehow dug deep inside to come up with that little extra.
1976 marked the end of the long and prosperous reign of Tom Yawkey, a truly unique individual in the history of baseball. Yawkey died at age 73.
After I made a speech, on the spur of the moment, I decided to trot around alongside the seats and just shake hands with fans, and I went around the whole ballpark doing that. What really helped was the tremendous reaction that the fans gave me, because after 23 years, I was going to retire from something that I loved. I just felt I wanted to thank them, and I really showed, I guess, emotion for the first time in all the years that I played at Fenway Park. I would say that would have to be the #1 highlight of my career.
To me, Carl was the best at playing left field. And when I first saw him, he had a tougher wall to play. Since 1976, they put panels on that wall, and you get I'd say you get a true bounce off of it. When I saw him play it, there was 4x6 panels up there, and the ball might carry him 5 different ways. He'd play a very shallow left field. He'd take the line drive away from the hitter. If the ball was hit over his head, he felt that it was going to be off the wall anyway. He couldn't catch it. So he'd rather take that line drive base hit away from him. Also, a ground ball through the hole, he had a better chance of throwing somebody out. He played an aggressive left field and the best left field that I saw.
They've had 3 outfielders before myself in the last 40 years, and to think that I could possibly be the 4th in 50 years is a great feeling. And, you know, that wall has a lot of tradition, and I want to be a part of it.
Each of these parks had its own characteristics, had its own personality. Generation to generation came to these parks. They expected to see baseball there and enjoy the atmosphere outdoors in a real baseball setting. And as these parks go away, we lose all those things too.
Some things should not change, in my view, and I think these parks have certainly been a big part of our lives, because baseball is America's greatest pastime. It's focused on tradition, it's focused on stability and family, and we'll lose a lot of that with Comiskey Park gone, Briggs Stadium gone, with Fenway gone and Wrigley Field gone.
You can say, well, if they tore down Fenway Park, we could build a new one. You wouldn't build it right. It's better to make the accommodations to save the old ballparks. If Fenway Park needs skyboxes to bring in the poverty-stricken owners enough money to save the stadium, before they tear it down and move someplace else, build the damn skyboxes. If Wrigley Field needs lights to survive, put up the damn lights. If you need structural reinforcements in Tiger Stadium so that you don't have people sniping at the ballpark the way they sniped at Comiskey Park, make the damn structural improvements, but save the ballpark. Because when you try to rebuild a cathedral 500 years too late, it doesn't come out the same.